is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Robin Dwyer.
And I'm Nawiji Barkil. Our top stories. China's President Xi Jinping makes his first foreign trip in nearly 3 years. We'll be live in Uzbekistan.
Calls for a windfall tax on energy companies and cuts to electricity use. The EU moves to tackle Europe's energy crisis.
Hundreds of thousands of well-wishers arrive in London to see the Queen lying in state, with queues estimated at more than 24 hours.
And a showdown in court. Twitter shareholders approve Elon Musk's takeover offer in a bid to force him to buy the firm.
China's President Xi Jinping has arrived in Uzbekistan as part of his first trip abroad in nearly 3 years. China's leader started his 3-day visit to Central Asia in neighbouring Kazakhstan.
President Xi was greeted at the airport in the capital city of Nur-Sultan by his Kazakh counterpart and other senior officials. The Chinese leader praised relations between China and Kazakhstan. He said both countries are good neighbours, friends and partners. President Xi Jinping was awarded the Order of the Golden Eagle by his Kazakh counterpart. The two countries are marking 3 decades since they established diplomatic ties.
I spoke to political and economic affairs commentator Einar Tangen, who explained the significance of President Xi's visit to Kazakhstan.
Well, I mean, there's a couple of reasons. One, from an international level, Xi Jinping is concentrating on the areas that are welcoming to China and also very important. Kazakhstan is a key player in the Belt and Road Initiative. It also reflects this kind of regionalism. To the south, you have ASEAN, you have China working with the global south, whether it's Africa or South America, but it also wants to be very close to the stands. Obviously, Russia is nearby, and there seems to be this kind of chasm is beginning to widen between northern developed countries and the global south, emerging and developing countries.
And the two countries share an enormous border, also another major player in the Belt and Road Initiative, very important for that initiative. Do you expect to see much in terms of trade in the economy on this trip?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when the Chinese go someplace, they don't show up empty-handed or with a framework. They tend to show up with a lot of very detailed proposals. I'm certain that there'll be signing of economic packages that are going to continue to boost the Belt and Road Initiative and to assure not only Kazakhstan, but also, as he goes on to the other SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the other groups in there, that they are in fact dedicated to accomplishing the goals of anti-terrorism, anti-separation, battling any kind of internal threats that are out there. Very, very different, perhaps, from NATO, which tends to look at external threats. This is really about internal ones.
And President Xi will move on to Uzbekistan and a reportedly very important meeting with Russia's President Vladimir Putin on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. What do you think we can expect to come out?
Well, I think you're going to see more reassurances on a country basis. I think the U.S. and Europe will be watching to see if there's any overt statement about supporting Russia in any kind of military capacity as it affects the Ukraine conflict. So in that respect, everyone will be watching, trying to read the tea leaves. I think you'll see Xi Jinping making it clear that the economic ties between Russia and China are in fact growing stronger and will continue to grow, but keeping somewhat of a distance as to the specific conflict, although echoing what has been said by Li Jianshu, who was in the neighborhood earlier, saying that every country has a right to be concerned about its security, especially around them.
Well, our correspondent Alyosha Milenkovic is in Samarkand in Uzbekistan, where the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit takes place on Thursday. So, Alyosha, what can we expect from this year's summit?
Well, expectations are really high, particularly because of the meeting, which you already mentioned a couple of times, meeting between the Chinese President Xi Jinping and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. But let's not forget, many other leaders will be present here. And this summit is going to be very interesting because it is going to be first time in past couple of years, even longer, since the COVID-19 started, that all those leaders can meet in person. So far, vast majority of their meetings actually were online, so they were communicating through cameras and through big video walls or screens. But now it will be the time for them to meet in person, to sit at the same table, to look each other at the eyes, and of course maybe to talk about some things that they couldn't talk over online, of course. And regarding the expectations, I spoke with several people, several interesting analysts in Tashkent just a few days ago, and let's hear what they had to say about those. Tashkent is a city of contrasts. On one hand, modern skyscrapers and shopping malls that rise in the town's most modern districts. On the other hand, there are the historic structures that preserve relics from the 14th century. Knowing the history seems to be key to the future of this entire region. Locked in many conflicts in the past, the countries in this part of the world came to believe there were better ways to resolve issues to everyone's benefit. That solution includes the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Over the years, it has grown into a structure that offers its members something that no other organization does. While some in the West have called it the Asian NATO created to counter the West, most experts have dismissed those labels.
SCO is an alternative to OSCE, not to NATO, as a political body, as a multilateral platform which emphasizes different set of values, different set of principles and rules, different from democracy, different from human rights articulation in Europe, in the West.
And it is precisely that difference that will be on display at this year's high-profile summit in Samarkand. The SCO is now made up of 8 full members, with 10 other states participating as either observer or dialogue partners. It is expected that Iran will sign commitments for becoming an additional full member in Samarkand. Interest by several other countries to join will also be addressed.
The Shanghai Cooperation Organization will act in providing security in the Eurasia area by strengthening economic and transport collaboration. They will also decide on the SCO expansion. The memorandum on Iran's full member status will be signed, and they will consider membership applications from Belarus and some other countries.
Top political brass will participate in the summit in Samarkand, including the Chinese President Xi Jinping, Russian President Vladimir Putin, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and many others. A lot of important bilateral meetings are scheduled during this summit. According to local experts, all of those meetings will be a show that a new multipolar world has emerged and is here to stay. And of course, exactly those bilateral meetings are actually going to be the key of this year's summit, which is 22nd summit since the inception of this organization. Here in Samarkand, everything seems to be ready for it. We already learned that the Chinese President Xi Jinping arrived here from Kazakhstan. We learned that most of the other leaders will arrive tomorrow, and from tomorrow we can expect a lot of political activities here in Samarkand. Back to you, Robin.
Alyosha, thank you very much. That's our correspondent, Alyosha Milenkovic in Samarkand.
EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has given her annual State of the Union speech in the European Parliament in Strasbourg. The address focused on the bloc's response to the invasion of Ukraine and Europe's looming energy crisis.
Well, our correspondent Alex Cadier is in Brussels. So, Alex, how significant a speech was this for Ursula von der Leyen?
Well, it was a very significant speech. Now, it's always the biggest speech of the year for the European Commission President. It's a big landmark moment for them to set out both the State of the Union, as the speech is called, but also their vision for the next year in the European Union. But interestingly, it was also the first speech of its kind to be given whilst war was raging on the European continent. So that makes it a particularly historical speech for this year's address. As you'd imagine, tackling crises was top of the list. and also noting that the European Union's response to these crises has been faster than it has been in the past. Let's hear some more details of what was in that speech.
Supporting Ukraine, taking on Russia and tackling the energy crisis. These were the key themes of EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen's State of the Union speech in Strasbourg. Dressed in the colours of the Ukrainian flag and accompanied by Ukraine's First Lady, President von der Leyen had Russia in her crosshairs, framing Europe's role in supporting Ukraine as a battle for the future of democracy.
This is not only a war unleashed by Russia against Ukraine. This is also a war on our energy. It's a war on our economy. It's a war on our values. It is a war on our future. It is about autocracy against democracy.
Ursula von der Leyen also made it clear that Europe would not back down anytime soon in the face of what she called Russia's trail of death and destruction.
The sanctions are here to stay. This is time for us for resolve and not for appeasement. This has to be very clear.
The speech also saw landmark announcements on the EU's plan to tackle the energy crisis. Ursula von der Leyen confirmed that fossil fuel providers would pay a tax on excess profits made since the start of the war, and that providers with lower production costs, like those with wind and solar, would also see their profits clawed back and used to support European citizens to cope with the soaring cost of energy bills.
In these times, it is wrong to receive extraordinary record revenues and profits benefiting from war and on the back of our consumers.
After the speech, some members of the European Parliament were critical of the plans, saying they didn't address the concerns of everyday citizens.
Millions can no longer cope with the huge rise in the cost of living, and not just energy bills. Millions who can't stand that while their salaries stagnate and lag behind inflation, dividends to shareholders have gone up by 29%.
Beyond energy and Ukraine, Ursula von der Leyen also gave a preview of what the future of the EU could look like, speaking to countries in the Western Balkans and hinting at a future expansion of the European Union.
I want to know the people of the Western Balkans, Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia, to know you are part of our family, you are the future of our union and in our union, and our union is not complete without you.
So while the focus was on tackling crises in the present, there was also room to look at Europe's future.
Well, looking at Europe's future there, a big part of that speech as well, and I think in any other time, in any other point, that would have been a very, very big thing indeed today, looking at expansion of the European Union, and if you include Ukraine, all the way to Russia's border. So that would have been a huge geopolitical announcement, but of course the invasion of Ukraine slightly sidelining that particular announcement. But it's interesting to see that if you think back to 2008 and the war in Georgia, now this is a country that's considering a membership of the European Union. So really interesting evolution there for what the future of the bloc might be. Now let's look a little bit more at that detailed energy proposal, that solidarity contribution, as they like to call it here in Brussels, or a tax to the rest of us, a tax on energy companies of 33% on surplus profits for the fiscal year 2022. So that brings us back to even before the start of the war in Ukraine. So very much a case of you can't profit from war off the back of our consumers, as Ursula von der Leyen said. So quite serious announcements, both for the present crises of the European Union and for the next months and years to come here in Brussels.
Alex Cadier in Brussels, thank you very much.
Let's get more on that story. Carol Lanu is Chief Executive Officer at CEPS, a leading think tank on EU affairs, and joins us now. Carol, first things first then, that speech that we were just hearing about, incredibly important for von der Leyen. What did you make of it?
I think this was a good speech, had a good tone, made the right emphasis, as you said in the beginning, the emphasis on the fact that we are in a very exceptional, a very abnormal situation. We are in this war with Russia. We are helping Ukraine, but also underlining how critically important it is to maintain our system, to maintain the foundations of the European Union, Europe as we know it today, which is rule of law, democracy, market economy. And she stressed this extremely well, and I think that is very important. However, whether it's reaching citizens, I don't know, but it's certainly important, let's say, that she's passing on this message to the members of the European Parliament and hopefully also to national politicians, Because we see in some member states, we've seen it in the Swedish elections this weekend, we are a bit afraid of what's going to happen in Italy. We have seen also manifestations of extreme right groups, for example, in Prague, but also we know that, for example, extreme left groups in Russia are less convinced that we need to have these strong sanctions against Russia, want to reduce the sanctions against Russia, and want in the end undermine our system or the strength of our democracy as we have it today. We see, for example, in the Swedish elections, the extreme right coming up very strongly, even if Sweden has just decided to join NATO and to be stronger opposed from a neutral country as it was to a NATO member state today.
And it's obviously a particularly difficult time for the EU, given its proximity to what's happening in Ukraine. But you've touched upon some of the other challenges there, a desire by some to move to the right, some to the left. Do you think those wider divisions, the ideological divisions, can be overcome moving forward?
We will always have extreme right, extreme left, but if you see them rising, we are a bit more concerned. Certainly because we have also Eurobarometer, meaning we have the surveys of all the European countries which show there is a strong support for this war. So it's difficult to reconcile. You see, overall, Europeans are fairly united, and we've seen this over the last months as well, let's say, in decisions here in Brussels. Europeans are very united, let's say, that we need to support Ukraine and we cannot lose this war. But on the other hand, I mean, how to reconcile this with some things which you see in certain member states? And that's very, I would say, disconcerting. Also because people need to be aware, as we now see, just recently it came out, let's say, that Russia has backed up many special groups in the EU just to try to, dilute messages, to sow discord in member states, that Russia is an active, basically, underminer of our system, has been an active underminer of our system for the last so many years.
And it was interesting, just lastly, how much energy featured in this speech as well, particularly cutting that dependence on Russia when it comes to gas, but also looking at the cost of living crisis affecting millions in the EU. Which countries are the most vulnerable when it comes to that, do you think, and why?
I think it's mostly Southern European countries which are less well off, or which have kind of, on average, let's say, lower income per capita as compared to Northern Europe. Of course, sometimes countries with less efficient energy systems, because the one thing which we need to know in this context is that energy policy has been, until today, and according to the treaty, it's a national competence, it's not a competence of the EU. Basically, the problems which we have today could have been avoided if we have been better aware about what Russia was doing. We knew that Russia was manipulating the prices already last year in September, when the first hikes in the prices appeared, for example, in certain countries, when Spain started to complain. Nobody knew that Russia was manipulating the prices, probably a few specialists, but the public at large, the policymakers didn't know. If we were to have got much more policy insight into energy markets and much more stronger coordination here in Brussels, or at least at EU level, we could have acted much earlier. But also, we know that since the oil crisis in the 1970s, that we are vulnerable to this kind of manipulation, to the use of the energy weapon. Apparently, we haven't learned our lesson. We should have learned that lesson, and we should have known, let's say, they should be less dependent on, for example, the case of Germany, for 40% on Russian gas. That is extremely dangerous.
Okay, thanks for your thoughts. That's Carol Lanu, Chief Executive Officer at the think tank CEPS.
Thank you.
You're watching CGTN. Coming up, why renewable energy generation is gearing up for unprecedented growth amid the war in Ukraine.
There's a new agenda for a new world, accelerating change in almost every part of our lives. It's shifting the norms of how we work, travel, and connect. How we think, interact, and develop. It's a new reality, a new agenda with me, Juliet Mann.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and the bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with global business, only on CGTN.
Welcome back. Remember, CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV, online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Germany's energy ministers are meeting to discuss how to secure supplies ahead of the winter months.
State ministers meeting in Hanover are considering how best to extend the life of the country's remaining nuclear power stations.
Just over half of all German gas imports come from Russia, and the country is looking to diversify its energy sources.
Let's talk to our correspondent Natalie Carney, who's in Munich for us. Natalie, do we know what's come out of that meeting then?
Well, today the ministers have been discussing, as you rightly mentioned, the energy crisis in this country. Germany has been the largest of all EU members importing Russian gas, so it's of the utmost importance, of course, here. So they've been discussing energy prices, they've been discussing supply security, as well as a stress test on those two remaining nuclear plants that you mentioned here in the south of the country, which they are going to keep open, extend the operation of until mid-April to keep that security in place, just in case they do need them. What we know is that Bavaria's economy minister, Hubert Aiwanger, did present a 10-point policy plan to the ministers earlier on today, in which he said the federal government is missing too many opportunities to get the current energy crisis under control. The points that he brought forward included exploiting biogas potential, as well as creating planning security for these nuclear power plants through to 2025, as well as enabling companies to switch fuels, as well expanding nationwide hydrogen infrastructure. Now, there's a big push here in Bavaria in that regard, and as well reducing electricity prices quickly and unbureaucratically. Chancellor Olaf Scholz of Germany will be meeting again with the 16 ministers of each federal state here in Germany on the 28th, in which these points will be further discussed, as well as the recently announced $65 billion relief package for households and consumers in general, businesses as well.
And another sign that companies are feeling the pinch here, Natalie, German energy giant Uniper warning the government that it may have to take a controlling stake in its business.
Yes, Uniper is the largest importer of Russian gas in Germany, so you can just imagine how badly they've been affected by all of this. They did say on Wednesday that the government might take a controlling stake in the company in order to save the energy sector. That stake could be as high as 88%, according to some reports. Since Moscow slashed their exports to Germany and the European Union, Uniper has basically been burning through their reserves in an effort to try to find and source alternative sources for the energy supplies. Back in July, Berlin did agree to a rescue package for Uniper, which has grown to upwards of $19 billion but Uniper is now saying that's just simply not enough. In a statement, the company said the parties are looking into alternative solutions, including a straight equity increase that would result in a significant majority participation by the German government. No decision in that matter has been taken so far, and we've had no word yet from the federal government in that as well.
Okay, thanks for that, Natalie. That's our correspondent, Natalie Carney, in Munich.
France will limit energy price rises to 15% next year as the government battles to control the explosion of costs and supply issues affecting Europe's energy market.
Prime Minister Elizabeth Borne says France will extend its price cap to deal with the cost of living crisis. Our correspondent Ross Cullen reports now from Paris.
The extension of the price cap into 2023 will cost the French government some $16 billion, but it's a move the government feels is necessary to continue to try to support households facing rocketing bills and rising inflation. The Prime Minister said that France has been the most active EU member state in cushioning consumers from what she described as the abnormally high energy prices. This year, the increase in electricity costs has been capped by the government at 4%, and gas prices have been frozen at the level they were in October 2021. Next month, the government will launch a national campaign encouraging the public and businesses to focus on what it's calling energy sobriety. Also on Wednesday, the French electricity network RTE did not rule out the risk of supply cuts, but said this could be avoided by lowering national consumption by up to 5% and possibly even 15%. The Energy Transition Minister, also speaking on Wednesday, said cutting energy use is an important objective in the context of the war in Ukraine. The European Union has already urged national governments to cut consumption by 15% to ensure enough storage capacity to see the continent through the winter, especially if pipeline interruptions and shut-offs by Russia continue. Ross Cullen, CGTN, Paris.
The United Nations says the war in Ukraine will act as a catalyst for unprecedented growth in renewable power generation, especially in parts of Southeast and Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Rana Adib is Executive Secretary of policy network REN21, which helped prepare the UN report.
So there are different aspects to this. I think on the short term, indeed, when we are looking into the UNEC region and the 18 countries we looked in, Ukraine has been one of the leading countries in terms of renewable energy growth. And the conflict in the Ukraine has also led to the fact that 90% of Ukraine's wind power capacities and 30% of the solar PV capacities have basically been destroyed on the short term. Interestingly, they are partially destroyed only, which means like in a post-conflict context, they will be operational again very quickly. It has also an impact, obviously, on investments, existing risk and perceived risk. But on the positive side, I guess, the conflict has really highlighted how important it is to move away from fossil fuel for energy security and sovereignty reasons. And renewable energy plays a key role here. So the awareness about the objective and the potential of renewable energy is growing in the UNEC region, but also in Europe and globally.
Before the invasion of Ukraine, both Ukraine and other countries have been making great strides, though, in boosting renewables.
Yes, indeed. Our last reporting was 5 years ago, and in 5 years, the UNEC countries we looked at have added 20 gigawatt more or less of installed capacities, and this is now leading to total installed capacities of 100 gigawatt. What is very interesting here is that for the first time, it's solar photovoltaics and wind that have really been contributing to the major extent to this uptake. And why is this happening? It's really happening because there has already been an increasing understanding how important energy security is. Why is this the case? I think the UNEC region is kind of the microcosm and is reflective of the global energy situation. In those 18 countries, 5 countries are producing natural gas and oil, and all the other countries are highly dependent on fossil fuel imports. That's one part. The other part is some countries depend very much on hydropower, and because of climate change, the production of hydropower has actually gone down.
In some countries, though, renewable energy is rather more an option for the future rather than now. Has the war in Ukraine postponed the moments when renewables become mainstream because accessing any form of energy is the priority?
Yes and no. I think there is really the reality that many of those countries have historically 100% electricity access. And still, they are really encountering energy poverty in many countries. This can be in remote and rural areas, but it is also because energy is more than electricity. It is also about heating, cooling, and transportation. And this is something which is very much at the forefront. So there is really a need to invest in solutions that can basically address those challenging topics and that are threats to the economic development and also to society. On a short term. Renewable energy here, especially decentralized renewable energy, are solutions and are very good alternatives and also cost-effective alternatives to importing fossil fuels. Now, the reality is in the UNEC, when we compare it, for instance, to Europe, it's a bit of a different starting point. Basically, handling cold weather, having challenges in heating homes has already been the case, whereas when we're looking to Western Europe, basically the impact of not having access to energy or a threat on energy supply has other implications.
The annual rate of inflation in the United Kingdom slowed in August. That's the first time that's happened in almost a year. Prices in the UK rose by 9.9% last month, down from 10.1% in July. The Bank of England plans another interest rate hike to control inflation, but that's been delayed by a week after the death of Queen Elizabeth.
A top European court has upheld an antitrust ruling against Google. The court said it largely confirms the European Commission decision that Google used the Android mobile operating system to quash competition. But the US tech giant's fine was reduced slightly from a record $4.3 billion to $4.1 billion. Google says it's disappointed by the verdict.
The Japanese yen has rallied slightly after the Bank of Japan hinted at a possible intervention to control exchange rates. The currency, which has hit 10-year lows against the dollar in recent weeks, jumped 1% after bank officials called traders to ask about market conditions. Japan has kept the policy of low interest rates to boost its exports and has seen the yen drop by a fifth against the US dollar so far this year.
You're watching CGTN. Still to come. The Ukrainian flag flies over the city of Izium as President Zelensky says 8,000 square kilometers of land is back in Kyiv's control.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Robin Dwyer and Naweed Jabarkil. Our headlines once again. China's President Xi Jinping makes his first foreign trip in nearly 3 years and calls for a windfall tax on energy companies and cuts to electricity use. The EU moves to tackle Europe's energy crisis.
In the United Kingdom, the first mourners are being allowed in to see Queen Elizabeth lying in state in London 6 days after her death at the age of 96.
Hundreds of thousands of people have come to the capital, with queuing times estimated at more than 24 hours.
Well, our correspondent Andrew Wilson is at the Palace of Westminster. So, Andrew, this is the start of an important new phase in the mourning period. What's happening where you are?
Well, you really can sense a shift now, Robert, in the way proceedings are being conducted. Up until now, there was very much an element of improvisation. Who knew that Her Majesty the Queen would pass away in Balmoral in Scotland? It could have easily have been Sandringham up in Norfolk, or at Windsor Castle, or even at Buckingham Palace itself. So although this operation, codenamed Operation Bridge, a national institutional coordination about what happens when a monarch passes away, was ready for all eventualities, it was really only today that things clicked into the rock-solid preparations for the departure of Queen Elizabeth, to be laid to rest eventually on Monday. Last night, a private moment for the family, the royal family, to gather around the coffin in the privacy of Buckingham Palace, and then today at 22 minutes past 2, a gun carriage carrying the Queen's coffin with the imperial crown mounted on top and followed by members of the royal family made its way down the Mall, accompanied by Coldstream Guards, Grenadier Guards, all the soldiers associated with the royal household, and indeed the King's Troop Royal Horse Artillery as well, who carried the gun carriage and had the horses that pulled it along down the Mall, walking at slow pace, 75 steps a second, which is a funeral march, rather than the usual 60. That's difficult for people to do for such a sustained period. It's also difficult for the horses to do as well. And that gives you an example of how much practice and training and rehearsing that has been going on over the months and years in preparation for this day. Those horses that towed the gun carriage, indeed the horses that carried the guardsmen either side of the gun carriage as well, would have been trained to not be concerned about crowds around them, to be able to walk slowly for sustained periods of time, to not shy away if someone throws flowers in front of them. And also they've been taught not to be concerned, you know how empathetic horses are, to get emotionally upset by people expressing grief around them. It's extraordinarily intricate, and it went, of course, without a hitch. The Queen now in Westminster Hall, waiting for the public to file past their moment. The gates were opened, if you like, for the Queen to lie in state, the public to file past, was just over half an hour ago. And actually you can see the lines here, they're being staggered by the police, but people are starting to make their way into the Great Hall.
And Andrew, we're just about to put on screen a map of the route that the queue to view Queen Elizabeth lying in state will take, just to show you how long it is. It's not as long as this at the moment, but it's expected to grow to more than 7 kilometres long, and the numbers of people in it are expected to be beyond anything seen before.
Yes, we've done this before in the UK. Winston Churchill's coffin lay in state and people filed past. The Queen's father, King George, lay in state, and then there were reports of congestion in the centre of town and reports that perhaps as many as 1 million people made their way around, and that's going back to the 1950s. Princess Diana also lay in state, as did the Queen Mother as well, Elizabeth the Queen Mother, in 2002, in the same hall that the Queen's coffin now lies. So the expectation is, and it's an unknown one, it's hard to predict, that the public will descend on London. They've got 4 days and 4 nights for this to be allowed for people to file past. So as you can see from that map, it makes its way over Lambeth Bridge and into Westminster, but going the other way, back to the rear end of the queue, if you like, that's a good 7 kilometres down, past Tower Bridge, to anyone who's familiar with London, along the banks of the Thames, and beyond to Southwark Park, where people will muster. And people have been warned that there'll be no possibility of sitting down because the queue is constantly moving, that they may be in there for up to 30 hours, but certainly can expect perhaps an overnight wait in the queue as well, and they're warning people that it is going to be difficult. But it doesn't seem as if many have been deterred. The enthusiasm for this queue is more than I've seen in the past, more than I saw for the Queen Mother's funeral and indeed for Princess Diana's as well. The sovereign has passed away after 70 years on the throne, and people want to gather from all over the country and indeed all over the world to come and commemorate that, and they will wait in line.
And Andrew, as you're talking to us, we're seeing live pictures from inside showing a steady stream of people coming to view Queen Elizabeth lying in state. Looking ahead to Monday, when it's her funeral, what's being done in terms of security and preparation for it?
Well, in terms of the commemorative side, about 9,000 servicemen and women have been involved in Operation London Bridge. Soldiers, Air Force, Marine band waiting for the hearse as it came up, the gun carriage as it came up today. And that was represented also by the royal family. You saw that King Charles wore the uniform of a field marshal in the procession. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, wore the uniform of a Vice Admiral in the Navy, and Prince William, now Prince of Wales, wore an RAF uniform. All the services are represented, so they're taking part in a huge way. 30,000 police, not only Metropolitan Police, but also from services across the country, are involved in the operation here, as well as in Windsor as well, where the Queen will eventually be laid to rest. So on Monday morning, the coffin will be brought out of Westminster Hall, that 1,000-year-old symbol of British monarchy, and will be taken not far, a short distance, to Westminster Abbey. Westminster Abbey itself is not the biggest of the abbeys in London. St Paul's Cathedral is considerably larger, but the Queen clearly chose that. There's only room for 2,000 in the congregation, so that severely limits visitors being allowed to come, not only from the UK, VIPs from here, but also from abroad. So countries that will be sending dignitaries, and plenty will, are being limited to one with a +1, and that's it. So, for example, from the United States, President Biden will be coming, and the First Lady, but you'd have thought President Obama and Michelle Obama as well would like to have come. They can't. They aren't able to come simply because of numbers. It's going to be a very intimate service, I think, on Monday, before the Queen is then moved again from there to the chapel, St George's Chapel at Windsor Castle, where there'll be a private committal service for the family only, no cameras to observe that one, and then she'll be laid to rest in the, near to the Royal Vault in Windsor Castle.
Andrew, thank you very much. That's our correspondent Andrew Wilson at the Palace of Westminster.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has attended a flag-raising event in the eastern city of Izium after it was retaken from Russian troops.
Kyiv says it's continuing to make gains in the Kharkiv region, with 8,000 square kilometres of territory back under its control.
Let's take you to the Ukrainian capital. Our correspondent Julia Chapman is there for us. Julia, this visit by President Zelensky, a surprise visit to Izium. What's he been saying to those on the front line?
It was indeed, and President Zelensky met with troops that have been involved in this rapid counter-offensive carried out by Ukrainian forces in the Kharkiv region over the last 10 days or so. As you said, he attended a flag-raising ceremony over City Hall, where the Ukrainian flag now flies once again, singing the national anthem and going on to bestow honors on the soldiers who were involved in the counter-offensive. He was assessing the damage in the town, speaking with residents as well. There's certainly a lot of damage to critical infrastructure, energy infrastructure not functional in places like Izium and Balaklia. Ukrainian officials saying that work is now underway to stabilize the situation in these places that had been under Russian control for so many months. And this is what the Ukrainian president said about his impressions visiting Izium today.
The view is very shocking, but it's not shock for me because we began to see the same pictures from Bucha, from the first deoccupied territories. So the same, destroyed buildings, killed people, and so what can I say?
And Julia, some calling this a retreat, some in Russia calling it regrouping. Are there any signs from Moscow about what Russia's next move may be?
This is certainly Russia's most significant loss in the conflict with Ukraine since its forces retreated from around Kyiv in April this year. Certainly, they have said that this is a regrouping of their forces, that they have redeployed them to the Donbass region, where there is now still intense fighting going on with Ukrainian troops, particularly in the Luhansk region, further north, near the Kharkiv region. But we are hearing from Russia that it is still determined to achieve all the goals of its so-called special military operation, insisting that this is only a temporary setback, although it hasn't been directly addressed by the leadership, despite what is mounting criticism in Russia about how things have gone in the Kharkiv region. But we are seeing also that there is still intense fighting ongoing, and there is speculation and widespread fear that what could happen now is that there will be an escalation in how Russia handles the situation in Ukraine, having had faced losses so significant in the region that they had reportedly left behind tanks in places like Izium and other areas of our Kharkiv. So there are fears that there could be more strikes on critical infrastructure. Just this afternoon, there was apparently 8 cruise missiles launched at a town in southern Ukraine, which Ukrainian officials believe was aimed at a waterworks there. So what could happen next? Certainly still far from unclear, but there are fears that in retaliation for this, there could be a stepping up of Russian attacks. In the meantime, today there has been a phone call between the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and Russian President Vladimir Putin. The UN, of course, trying to mediate, trying to ensure that there is access to prisoners of war, that there are prisoner exchanges going on, and indeed ensuring that grain is leaving Ukraine under this UN brokered deal with Russia and Ukraine. And there's also now discussion reportedly about potentially ammonia being exported from Russia into Ukraine in order to get out into the rest of the world.
Thanks for that, Julia. That's our correspondent, Julia Chapman, live in Kyiv.
More than 150 troops are reported to have been killed as fighting continues along the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Armenia has warned the standoff could escalate into war after Russian brokered ceasefire collapsed on Tuesday. The two countries blame each other for the latest outbreak in the long-running conflict, which is centred on the disputed region of Nagorno-Karabakh.
11 people are reported to have been killed when a minibus fell into a gorge in northern India. The accident happened on a mountain road in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. 25 passengers were injured after the vehicle veered off the road, plunging 250 feet.
China has issued its highest weather alert as Typhoon Weifar makes landfall on its eastern coast, bringing heavy rain and strong winds. All flights at Shanghai's 2 international airports have been cancelled. Ships have been asked to take shelter in harbours and schools closed. Weifar is the 12th tropical cyclone to hit China this year.
And a woman in the Lebanese capital, Beirut, has held up a bank to get her own money. The woman, who was apparently armed, entered the branch and left half an hour later with $13,000 from her account. Lebanon's cash-strapped banks have limited withdrawals from savings accounts since the financial crisis hit 3 years ago.
In the United States, shareholders at the social media platform Twitter have voted to approve the proposed $44 billion takeover by Tesla chief Elon Musk. But it's a deal that Musk no longer wants, since first proposing it in April, and he's going to fight it in court next month. Well, our correspondent John Terrett's in New York. John, Twitter shareholders want this takeover. They went for Musk.
They do. Yeah, they do. They really do badly, Robin and Nawida. Of course, we did this on the programme yesterday, particularly the whistleblower stuff. We'll get to that in just a second. But the shareholders, in the end, did vote in favour of this deal going ahead. And the board did several months ago. Now all the shareholders have joined in. So it's on. $44 billion, $54.20 a share. They understand that Musk will take their company private, and they're cool with that. Why? Because the banks are telling them it'll take them a long time, if ever, on their own to get to what he's offering, $54.20 a share. Share price this morning is only at $41.39. It's about 25% off, 26% off what Musk is actually offering. So no wonder they voted for it. But as you say, Musk doesn't want it anymore. He wrote a Dear John letter the other day. Twitter rejected that. So now we move on to the Court of Chancery in Delaware, where Musk had some success last week. The judge there denied his application to delay the start of the trial, but is allowing him to include the whistleblower allegations. Now, this is what we dealt with yesterday on the programme, a man called Mudge telling the Senate Judiciary Committee, I won't go through all the details again, but basically Twitter put profit ahead of security. And if this is all true, a lot of what he said, if it is true, Twitter is in very deep trouble down the road. But I'll tell you, Robin and Naweed, Wall Street certainly thinks that in the end, Musk will end up taking Twitter private with what amounts to that deal on the table. Guys?
Well, John, let's talk about another big international name. Changes are brewing at Starbucks.
I know, and Starbucks sent over a document like this. I mean, it's just so much information that they've included. Basically, they want to rejuvenate their company. Let me help you understand. Howard Schultz is the interim CEO. He says the problem is we've made some self-induced mistakes and we've lost our way. And you will understand what he means from this statement. He said physical stores built for a different era, and now we have to modernize to match this moment. And now Starbucks is a very big company, plenty of growth potential in the US and especially in Asia and actually especially in China. But the problem is 60% of their business in America is food and cold drinks. And they take a lot of preparation for the baristas and they slow things down. So Starbucks investing $450 million in automation for these stores. They hope to get a mocha frappuccino down from basically 1 minute 16 seconds to 35 seconds. They say they also want to help their baristas make their lives easier and smoother. That's in the light of many of them wanting to unionize, which Starbucks doesn't agree with. And they're going to create thousands of new stores. They presently have about 34,000. They want 45,000, including in Asia and China, within the next 5 years or so. Finally, just to make you smile, the new man who took over, and his first day was yesterday pretty much, is called Laxman Narasimhan, and he's the former CEO of household products maker Reckitt and Benckiser. And somebody asked him at the news conference, when the barista says to you, what name do you want on your cup, bearing in mind you're called Laxman Narasimhan, which is quite long, he said, I asked for Lax, L-A-X. Guys.
John, cheers to you. Our correspondent, John Terrett in New York.
Thank you.
Still ahead here on Global Business Europe. Running dry. River levels in parts of southern France hit new lows as drought in Europe gets worse.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
Unprecedented scenes that we saw.
The cleanup operation is now well and truly underway.
Parts of southern Europe remain in a state of emergency.
Context gives meaning. People make history.
Far more than 1,000 people have come here today.
But authorities are still on high alert.
So now we've actually become the border on this road.
A complex world demands a comprehensive view.
But with the cleanup efforts more or less under control,
the economic impact is bound to ripple across the country.
There's plastic pollution everywhere.
Because the world today matters for your world tomorrow.
This is the living area of the crew.
The focus is firmly on future technologies.
Well, this is something completely different.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. The climate crisis has led to Europe's hottest summer on record. Droughts on the continent are getting worse each year, including in some of southern France's most famous regions.
Our correspondent Sarah Coates is in Toulouse, where environmental protection groups are making long-term plans to deal with what could be a potentially catastrophic situation.
It's being called the new norm, but depressing scenes like this are far from normal in the south of France. The Garonne River, which runs through France's fourth largest city, Toulouse, is quickly drying up as the worst drought to hit France since 1958 is showing no sign of lifting.
The water here is not only used by the wildlife, such as birds and the fish, but also by us. 1 million people drink water from the Garonne. Farmers use the water for their crops, and water is also used to create electricity, so it's vital for us.
I've been living here for 20 years. I have never seen the river level so low, and that is after some extra water was released from reservoirs. It's scary to think that without that, water levels would be even lower.
Water restrictions remain in place across much of France, with outdoor spaces that are normally lush and green now tinder dry, with residents here in Toulouse expecting harsher restrictions to be enforced at any moment. And the timing of this drought really couldn't be worse, as Europe's energy shortage takes hold, leaving people in a very difficult position.
Comment on va pouvoir s'armer contre ça?
What can we do to avoid it? On one hand, we have the effects of global warming with rising temperatures. On the other, we can't use air conditioning to go through these hot periods when we need to use less power. This is making me very anxious.
The unprecedented situation is also heaping pressure on authorities and environmental groups who say, while they've done a lot to fight the effects of climate change, nobody was ready for this.
People are talking about how exceptional this year was, but that's if you're looking at it from the past. If you look at the future, this year might be average, a different point of view. So all the work we've been doing, we need to go faster. We need to be able to keep the water where it falls. When it rains in the mountains, the water is contained there. When it rains on a field, the water needs to stay there. We need to change our habits. In the cities, we should be able to save the water from the streets, from our gutters. We should keep the water, and that's what we need to work on, whether it's in a natural or artificial way.
Extra water continues to be released into the Garonne, which is home to around 6 migratory fish species like salmon, which swim upstream from where the river meets the sea. But that water is also hotter than it's been in the past, and experts are now having to explore what can be done about that. With new problems constantly arising, new solutions need to be found, with deals being hashed out right now on both a local and national level to not only bring up the volume of water, but decrease its temperature. Sarah Coates for CGTN in Toulouse.
Car enthusiasts will be converging on the US city of Detroit over the coming days as the North American International Auto Show gets underway, the first since the pandemic.
And organisers are promising visitors to Motor City, an altogether different experience since the last show there years ago. Our correspondent Dan Williams has the story.
After a 3.5-year absence due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the North American International Auto Show returns to Detroit. But this time the show is taking place during a completely different season. Previous auto shows here were held during a wintry January. Organisers hope the move to September will make it a more consumer-focused experience, with the ability to take part of the show outdoors and include other models of transport. And there is good reason to change up the format. Just a handful of automakers will be revealing new products here. Instead, attendees will still get the chance to see the latest autos, while also getting the opportunity to ride and drive cars, see monster trucks in action, and even test out a portion of the city's 2023 Grand Prix track.
Well, we're certainly excited about the change from January to September. For us, it's a complete game changer because it's allowing us to take the auto show to an indoor and outdoor activation. So you'll find that there's a great Hart Plaza, beautiful Hart Plaza next to us that's going to be completely engaged in all kinds of great activities, both for adults and for families, right on the beautiful riverfront of Detroit. So September has really opened up some great opportunities for us at the show.
Displays include a back-in-time exhibit allowing visitors the chance to drive off-road vehicles around dinosaurs, while the show above the show features air mobility flight demonstrations from electric aircraft to hoverboards. Among those expected to attend include the US President Joe Biden, scheduled to make remarks Wednesday. And then, after a couple of days for industry insiders, the show will open to the public on Saturday. Dan Williams, CGTN, Detroit.
The headlines again. China's President Xi Jinping makes his first foreign trip in nearly 3 years.
Calls for a windfall tax on energy companies and cuts to electricity use. The EU moves to tackle Europe's energy crisis.
And hundreds of thousands of well-wishers arrive in London to see the Queen lying in state, with queues estimated at more than 24 hours.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
Remember, we're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Daily Motion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.